Hit the like button, share your thoughts, subscribe, and tap the bell icon. Ziyara's hands trembled as she fastened the last strap of the small escape pod. Her sleek, lavender-skinned reflection flickered on the console screen, her wide, silver eyes betraying a mix of terror and determination. She could still hear the echo of her mother-in-law's scathing words. A widow has no right to dream. Your place is here. Silent, obedient. Her late husband, Threx, had been a kind man, but tradition weighed heavier than love. When he died, so did Ziyara's freedom. For 3 long Silixian years, she endured, her once bright dreams of exploring the galaxy dimming under the suffocating expectations of her species. Until tonight, the airlock hissed as she activated the pod's launch sequence. She had bribed a low-ranking guard, trading an heirloom bracelet for a chance at freedom. As the countdown began, the pounding on the hatch grew louder. "Ziyara, don't do this," a male voice roared, one of her brother-in-law's lackeys. She didn't respond. The hatch shook under their attempts to breach it, but she trusted her timing. At the precise moment the lock gave way, the pod blasted off, throwing her pursuers backward. The stars swallowed her escape. Breathing heavily, Ziyara gripped the controls. She had no destination, only coordinates for a remote sector far from Silixian influence. The hum of the engine soothed her frayed nerves, and for the first time in years, she felt the weight of possibility. That weight turned heavy when alarms blared. A quick scan revealed damage to the pod's navigation system, likely sabotage from her brother-in-law's men. A nearby planet's gravity field was pulling her in, and despite her best efforts to stabilize the descent, the pod hurtled toward its surface. When she woke, the view through the cracked windshield took her breath away. Rolling plains stretched beneath a canopy of stars, their light reflected in a nearby stream. The air smelled alive, filled with earthy warmth and something sweet she couldn't identify. The peace was short-lived. A shadow crossed the windshield. Ziyara's heart raced as she reached for the blade strapped to her thigh. The hatch opened with a creak, revealing a figure unlike anything she'd seen before. The being was tall and broad, with sun-bronzed skin and a sharp jawline dusted with stubble. His wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face, but his eyes, piercing and blue, seemed to see right through her. "You okay in there, miss?" he asked, his voice low and steady, the language unfamiliar but oddly comforting. Ziyara tightened her grip on the blade but didn't answer. She scanned his appearance, no weapons, no sign of hostility. He raised his hands in a gesture she interpreted as non-threatening. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, stepping closer. She remained silent, her mind racing. On Selix, men spoke with authority, rarely caring for a woman's consent. But this one's tone held curiosity, not dominance. The man sighed, scratching his head. "Name's Jack. Don't know what kind of trouble brought you here, but this ranch is the safest place for miles." Ziyara's blade wavered. Exhaustion and the strange sincerity in his voice made her hesitate. Her eyes fluttered closed, and the next thing she knew, strong arms lifted her from the pod. As consciousness faded, she heard him murmur, "You're not from around here, are you?" For the first time, Ziyara wasn't sure if running had led her to freedom, or into a whole new kind of chaos. The first thing Ziyara noticed when she woke was the unfamiliar softness beneath her. A quilted blanket, frayed at the edges, covered her body. The bed creaked beneath her slightest movement, the room smelling of wood and something sweet, perhaps the same scent that had wafted through the air upon her landing. Her head throbbed. The events of the escape came rushing back. The pursuit, the pod, the crash. And then, him. "Jack," she murmured aloud, testing the name on her tongue. The language was foreign, but her advanced Silixian neural pathways quickly decoded its structure. A creak from the doorway snapped her attention. Jack leaned against the frame, a cup of steaming liquid in his hand. His hat was gone, revealing messy blonde hair. He smiled when he saw her awake, a dimple appearing in his cheek. "Morning," he said, stepping closer and setting the cup on a small table beside the bed. "Figured you'd need some rest after that crash. You were out cold." Ziyara tensed, sitting up and pressing her back against the wall. The blanket slipped, revealing her lavender-hued skin. Jack's eyes flicked to her arms, but if he found her appearance strange, he didn't show it. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice wavering but clear. "My ranch. Middle of nowhere, Texas." He sat on a nearby chair, his movements unhurried. "Found you in that, spaceship of yours last night. Thought I was dreaming till I saw you." Her silver eyes narrowed. "Why did you help me?" Jack shrugged. "Didn't seem right, leaving someone hurt and stranded, no matter where they're from. You don't look like any trouble to me." Ziara tilted her head, studying him. Humans were an obscure species in Silixian records, largely dismissed as insignificant. Yet, this one radiated a kind of warmth she hadn't encountered even among her own people. "Your ship's busted up pretty bad," Jack continued. "But I reckon we can figure something out." His casual offer of help caught her off guard. Back on Selix, assistance always came with strings: loyalty, repayment, or servitude. Here, this stranger offered aid freely. "Why?" she asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. Jack leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Look, lady, I don't know what's got you looking at me like I'm gonna bite. You're in trouble, right? I don't need to know why. Just figure everyone deserves a fair shot at getting back on their feet." Her instincts told her to stay guarded, but exhaustion and something deeper, a longing for kindness, softened her resolve. She nodded slightly. "Thank you," she said, her tone cautious but sincere. Jack grinned. "That's more like it. Now you should eat. I brought you some soup." He gestured to the cup on the table. "It's not much, but it's hot." Ziara reached for the cup, her fingers brushing against the ceramic. The warmth surprised her. Food on Selix was always served cold. She hesitated, unsure of earthly customs. "It's safe," Jack assured her, sensing her hesitation. "I ain't trying to poison you or anything." She sipped tentatively, her eyes widening at the rich, savory flavor. It was unlike anything she'd tasted before, simple but comforting. Jack chuckled. "Guess that's a good sign. You've got a name?" Ziara hesitated. Sharing her name felt intimate, almost dangerous. But something about Jack's easy demeanor coaxed the words out of her. "Ziara," she said quietly. "Well, Ziara, you're welcome to stay here till you figure things out," Jack said. "You'll be safe. Ain't nobody comes around these parts unless they're lost." His words sparked a flicker of hope. If this place was as isolated as he claimed, her pursuers might never find her. But she couldn't afford to get comfortable. "You don't find me strange?" she asked, searching his face for hidden judgment. Jack leaned back, crossing his arms. "I've seen strange before. A two-headed calf born last spring. Now that was strange." He smiled. You're just different." Ziara's lips curved into the faintest smile. It was the first time anyone had described her without disdain. The following days brought challenges and discoveries. Jack taught Ziara the basics of ranch life, from mending fences to feeding the animals. She marveled at the simplicity and beauty of it all, how life could be so focused on growth and care rather than control and power. In turn, Ziara shared glimpses of her own knowledge. Her advanced understanding of technology amazed Jack, who joked about turning her into the ranch's mechanic of the future. Their conversations were filled with curiosity. Jack asked about the stars, her planet, and her people, while Ziara questioned everything about Earth's culture, often laughing at his attempts to explain concepts like football or barbecue. Despite their growing bond, Ziara couldn't shake the gnawing fear that her past would catch up with her. Each night, as she stared at the vast Texas sky, she wondered if Silixian trackers were already on her trail. And yet, for the first time in her life, she felt something new, a glimmer of peace, and maybe, just maybe, the beginnings of belonging. Days turned into weeks, and Ziara slowly adapted to life on Jack's ranch. Though she still felt out of place, Jack's patience and humor made the transition easier. Every task he assigned her, fixing a fence, tending to a sick calf, or cooking over an open flame, was a small challenge that chipped away at her sense of alienation. Jack, in turn, found himself fascinated by Ziyara's otherworldly abilities. Her advanced technology repaired his broken tractor in hours. Her knowledge of botany tripled the yield of his small garden. And her quick reflexes made her a natural at wrangling livestock. But their differences ran deeper than skills. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the plains in hues of gold and crimson, Jack invited Ziyara to join him on the porch. He handed her a glass of iced tea, a beverage she had grown fond of despite initially finding it too cold for comfort. "This is my favorite time of day," Jack said, leaning back in his chair. "Everything slows down and the world just feels still. What about you? Ever have moments like this on your planet?" Ziyara sipped her tea, her silver eyes reflecting the fading light. Stillness was rare on Celix. Our days were consumed by duty and tradition. Even leisure was dictated by rules. Jack raised an eyebrow. "No time for yourself? Not even to dream?" She shook her head. Dreaming was discouraged. Ambition, curiosity. These were seen as threats to the harmony of our society. Jack chuckled. "Sounds like a nightmare to me." "To me as well," she admitted, her voice softer. "That's why I left. I wanted more than the life they chose for me." Jack nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Takes guts to walk away from all that. Most folks wouldn't dare." Ziyara looked at him, studying the lines of his face. He seemed so grounded, so certain of his place in the world. "And you, Jack? Did you choose this life? Or was it chosen for you?" He let out a long breath, staring out at the horizon. "A little of both, I guess. My folks ran this ranch before me. When they passed, it felt right to keep it going. But sometimes," he paused, as if weighing his words, "sometimes I wonder what else is out there." Her heart skipped a beat. "You dream of leaving?" "Not leaving exactly. Just seeing, exploring. I've read about places I'll probably never go. Paris, Tokyo, the Amazon rainforest. Heck, I'd settle for seeing New York City someday." He chuckled, the sound tinged with wistfulness. Ziyara smiled faintly. "Your dreams are closer than you think, Jack. You could see those places if you chose to." Jack turned to her, his blue eyes sharp and steady. "And what about your dreams, Ziyara? What do you want now that you're free?" The question caught her off guard. She had been so focused on surviving, on escaping her past, that she hadn't allowed herself to imagine a future. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I think I want to find a place where I belong. A place where I can be myself without fear." Jack smiled. "Sounds like you're on the right track." As the days passed, Ziyara and Jack's bond deepened. They worked side by side, their conversations filled with laughter and the occasional friendly argument. But their cultural differences sometimes caused friction. One morning, as they tended to the horses, Jack showed Ziyara how to saddle one. She watched intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. "This strap here," Jack explained, pointing to the cinch, "needs to be tight, or the saddle slide right off." Ziyara nodded, taking the reins of the process. But as she tightened the strap, the horse whinnied and stomped its hooves. "You're spooking him," Jack said gently. "Gotta be firm but calm." Ziyara frowned. On Celix, animals are conditioned to obey. They don't resist. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Conditioned? Like trained?" "More like programmed," she said. "We use neural implants to control them." Jack's face darkened. "That's not how we do things here. Animals ain't machines. They've got feelings, instincts. You gotta earn their trust, not force it." His tone wasn't harsh, but Ziyara felt the sting of his words. "Your methods are inefficient," she said defensively. "And yours sound cold," Jack shot back. The tension hung in the air until Ziyara stepped back, her expression softening. "Perhaps I have much to learn," she admitted. Jack smiled, the tension easing. "We both do." Later that night, Ziyara stood outside the barn, staring up at the stars. She thought of Celix, of the life she had left behind. For all its flaws, it was still her home. But as she looked at Jack, working tirelessly to repair a broken gate, she felt a pull toward something new. A life of freedom, connection, and possibility. For the first time, she wondered if this strange little ranch in the middle of nowhere could become her place of belonging. But deep down, she knew her past wasn't done with her, and the more she and Jack grew closer, the more she feared dragging him into the dangers she had left behind. The wind carried a dry chill across the plains as Ziyara watched Jack load hay into the barn. She stood at the fence line, her gaze scanning the horizon. It had been weeks since her escape from Selix, and though she'd found a fragile sense of peace here, unease churned in her chest. She turned toward the sound of a distant hum, her sharp ears picking up something Jack couldn't hear. It wasn't the soft clatter of ranch life or the occasional rustle of wildlife. This was mechanical, a sound she knew all too well. "Jack," she called, her voice low and urgent. Jack paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "What's up?" "I need to check something," she said, heading toward the barn. Jack followed, concern etched on his face. "What kind of something?" Ziyara hesitated, debating whether to involve him. But there wasn't time for secrecy. "I think they've found me." "Who?" Jack asked, his tone hardening. "Selixian enforcers," she said. "If they're here, they won't stop until they take me back. Or worse." Jack's jaw tightened. "Well, they've got another thing coming if they think they can mess with my ranch." Ziyara turned to him, surprised by his conviction. "You don't understand. These aren't just soldiers. They're trackers, highly trained and armed with technology far beyond anything on this planet." Jack crossed his arms. "Doesn't matter. You're under my roof now, and I don't abandon people in need." "What do we need to do?" Ziyara blinked, her heart conflicted. Jack's loyalty stirred something deep within her, a mix of gratitude and fear. She couldn't let him get hurt because of her. "They won't stop until I'm captured," she said. "If I leave now, I can draw them away from you." Jack shook his head firmly. "No way. You're not going anywhere alone. We'll face this together." By nightfall, Ziyara had prepared a crude defense plan. Using scrap metal and parts from her crashed pod, she fashioned makeshift traps and EMP devices, all while Jack secured the perimeter with reinforced fencing and camouflage. "Your tech's something else," Jack said as Ziyara installed an energy pulse emitter near the barn. "I feel like I'm living in one of those sci-fi movies." Ziyara smirked faintly. "Your world is primitive, but it has its charms." Jack chuckled. "I'll take that as a compliment." The humor was short-lived. As the first stars appeared in the sky, Ziyara spotted a faint glow on the horizon. The hum she had heard earlier grew louder, now accompanied by the distinct whir of Selixian drones. "They're here," she said, her voice steady despite the tension coiling in her chest. Jack grabbed his rifle, though Ziyara had warned him it would be useless against Selixian technology. Still, he refused to sit idly by. "I'll handle the drones," Ziyara said. "You stay back and protect the house." Jack frowned. "Not a chance. We're in this together, remember?" Her protests fell on deaf ears as Jack joined her outside, his determination unshakable. The first drone descended with a high-pitched whine, its sleek metal body gleaming under the moonlight. Ziyara activated the EMP device, sending out a burst of energy that short-circuited the machine midair. "Got it!" Jack whooped, but Ziyara remained focused. "That's just the beginning," she warned. Moments later, two figures emerged from the shadows, their forms tall and imposing in sleek black armor. Their helmets reflected the light of their plasma weapons, which they raised in unison. "Ziyara of Selix," one of them said in their native tongue. "Surrender now, and we will grant you a swift return." Ziyara stepped forward, her blade drawn. "I am no longer bound by Selixian law. I will not go back." The enforcer tilted his head. "Then you leave us no choice." Jack, who had been crouching behind a stack of hay bales, took this as his cue. He fired a shot, the loud crack of his rifle startling the enforcers. Though the bullet glanced harmlessly off their armor, it distracted them long enough for Ziyara to activate a second EMP device. The pulse sent one of the enforcers' weapons flying, but the other quickly adapted, switching to a shock baton. He charged at Ziyara, his movements swift and calculated. She met him head-on, her blade clashing against the baton. Sparks flew as their weapons collided, the sound echoing across the ranch. Meanwhile, Jack tackled the second enforcer, using his lasso to entangle the man's legs. It was a crude tactic, but it bought him enough time to wrestle the plasma weapon away. "Not so tough without your fancy gadgets, huh?" Jack muttered, ducking as the enforcer swung a fist. Ziyara dispatched her opponent with a well-placed strike, her blade slicing through a weak point in the armor. The enforcer collapsed, stunned but alive. She turned just in time to see Jack deliver a punch that sent the second enforcer sprawling. "You okay?" Jack called, breathing heavily. Ziyara nodded, her silver eyes gleaming with resolve. "For now. But more will come." Jack picked up the discarded plasma weapon, testing its weight. "Then we'll be ready." As the dust settled, Ziyara felt a surge of hope. Jack's bravery and resourcefulness had proven that they were stronger together than she had ever imagined. But the battle had only just begun. If they were to survive what was coming, they would need more than courage. They would need to trust each other completely, and Ziyara wasn't sure she was ready for that. The night was silent once the last of the enforcers had been dealt with, their bodies lying inert on the dusty ground. The only sound was the wind, which carried the faint scent of impending rain. Jack stood over the two incapacitated figures, breathing heavily. He had been in fights before, barroom brawls, skirmishes with rival ranchers, but nothing like this. This wasn't just a fight for survival. This was a battle against something far larger than either of them. Ziyara, standing a few feet away, kept her distance. She had her weapon drawn, her eyes scanning the horizon. Her mind raced, calculating their next steps. "You did well," she said quietly. Jack wiped the sweat from his brow, looking at the bodies with mixed feelings. "They sure didn't make it easy." "They will come again," she replied, her voice calm but tinged with a hardness that spoke of the deep-seated fear she tried to suppress. Jack nodded grimly. "We need to be ready." A sudden thought struck him. "Ziyara, if they're coming for you, why not just leave? You said you wanted to be free. Maybe it's time to go somewhere they can't follow." Ziyara turned her head slowly, meeting his gaze. "I can't just run. If I do, I risk them tracking me again. I need to find a way to end this. Permanently." Jack's heart tightened at the resolve in her voice. She was a woman on a mission, one that didn't seem to allow for second chances. He knew that part of her wanted to fight this battle on her own. It was clear in the way she kept her distance, her reluctance to let him get too close. But he wasn't ready to give up on her. "We'll figure this out together," he said softly, taking a step toward her. Ziyara looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Her silvery eyes held a mixture of gratitude, confusion, and a deep-rooted hesitation. She had already crossed a line by staying. To get involved with Jack, to let him in on her fight, was a decision she wasn't ready to make. "I don't want to put you in danger," she said quietly. Jack was undeterred. "If you think you're getting rid of me that easily, you're wrong." She gave a small, reluctant smile, but it was gone as quickly as it came. The harsh reality of her situation was far more pressing. The Silixian enforcers were ruthless, and she had only delayed the inevitable. "We don't have much time," she said, stepping back to examine the downed enforcers. She checked for any identifying data chips or tracking devices that might help them anticipate the next attack. Jack crouched beside her, his eyes scanning the unconscious figures. "What are you looking for?" "Anything that can help us," Ziyara replied. "We need to find their command structure. If we can identify their weaknesses, we might have a chance." She worked quickly, prying open the chest plates of the enforcers. As she did, Jack noticed the intricate circuitry within, clearly more advanced than anything Earth had ever seen. "Wouldn't it be easier to just run?" Jack asked, though his tone was softer now, a hint of frustration behind his words. Ziyara paused for a moment, her fingers hovering over the technology embedded in the enforcer's suit. "Running only postpones the inevitable. If I run, they will follow. And they will keep hunting me until they capture me, or worse." Jack sat back on his heels, running a hand through his hair. He couldn't fully understand the depth of what she was saying, but he could feel it in the air around her. She was trapped, not just by the enforcers but by something far deeper, something she had carried with her from Selix. "Do you have a plan?" he asked, his voice steady. Ziyara hesitated before nodding. "Yes, but it's dangerous. Like everything else?" Jack replied dryly, trying to lighten the tension between them. Ziyara's lips quirked. "Exactly." She stood, brushing the dust from her pants. "We'll need to sabotage their communication systems, destroy their ability to track me. If I can cut off their network, I'll be free." Jack rose with her, his expression serious. "And how do we do that?" Ziyara turned to face him, her eyes unwavering. "I need to get to a satellite relay station, one that's deep in the mountains far from here. It's a long shot, but it's the only way to sever their reach." Jack's mind raced as he processed her words. A satellite relay station in the mountains, and she wanted him to help her get there? It sounded like a suicide mission, but something in him couldn't say no. Not to her. "Let's do it," Jack said, his voice firm. "I'll go with you." Ziyara shook her head. "It's too dangerous. I don't want to risk you." Jack stepped closer, his eyes intense. "I'm not going to sit by while you risk your life alone. This fight is as much mine as it is yours now." Ziyara studied him for a long moment, her heart torn. She had never relied on anyone in her life. Not like this. But Jack's resolve, his willingness to face the unknown with her, tugged at something deep inside her. Something she had buried beneath years of fear and duty. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice softer than it had been before. Jack reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We do this together or not at all." The decision was made, and the next morning, they packed what they could. Basic supplies, weapons, and anything that might help them survive the harsh terrain. The satellite relay station was a good 2 days' journey by foot, and Ziyara knew that the enforcers would be coming for them with a vengeance. But as they loaded their gear into Jack's truck, Ziyara couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into a trap. Every step she took felt like it carried her further from safety, yet closer to the one person she had allowed herself to care about. The sun had barely risen when Jack's truck rumbled down the gravel road, its tires kicking up dust as they left the familiar expanse of the ranch behind. Ziyara sat in the passenger seat, her gaze fixed on the sprawling plains stretching out before them. Her heart was heavy with the weight of what was to come. The journey ahead was perilous, both physically and mentally, and she wasn't sure she could bear it. Jack kept the truck at a steady pace, his eyes occasionally flicking to her. He had grown quiet in the last hour, sensing the storm of thoughts swirling in her mind. Despite the urgency of their mission, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was dragging her deeper into danger, deeper into a fight that was not his own. "How far are we from the mountains?" Jack asked, trying to break the silence. Ziyara's voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of anxiety. "We'll be there by nightfall if we keep moving." "Good," Jack said, though his eyes remained wary as they approached the winding roads leading toward the hills. "We've got a long way to go, but we'll make it." She didn't answer, but her fingers tightened around the handle of her gun. It was a reflex, a comfort in the face of the unknown. The Silixian enforcers wouldn't give up easily, and though they had managed to fend them off once, Ziyara knew they would come back with more resources, more firepower. The wind picked up as they neared the foothills, the once warm air now carrying a bite that made Ziyara pull her coat tighter around her. Jack turned off the road, navigating the narrow dirt trail that led deeper into the wilderness. The landscape grew more rugged, the trees denser, the terrain rougher. They were entering a part of the world untouched by civilization. "Is this where the relay station is?" Jack asked, squinting as the truck jostled over a particularly rocky patch of ground. "Yes," Ziyara replied, her voice distant. "The station is buried in the mountains. It's well hidden, shielded from most of the Earth's technology. Only the most advanced tech can detect it." Jack nodded but said nothing. He knew this was Ziyara's world, a place where his knowledge didn't reach, where her expertise outclassed his own. Still, the sense of foreboding was impossible to ignore. "Ziyara," Jack began, breaking the silence. "If this plan doesn't work, if we don't make it—" She turned to him sharply, her eyes flashing with an intensity that made his words falter. "We will make it," she said, her voice low but unyielding. "I'm not going to let them win. Not after everything." Jack met her gaze, seeing something in her he hadn't before. A deep-rooted resolve, a fierceness that could burn through anything in its path. But that fierceness also masked a vulnerability, one she tried to hide behind walls of deflection and strength. He had seen it in her before, when she had hesitated to let him in, when she kept him at arm's length. "I'm with you," he said simply, his voice steady. "We'll do this together, no matter what happens." She didn't respond immediately, but a subtle shift in her expression told him she appreciated his words. Still, she was careful with her emotions, holding them back like a dam ready to burst. She had never been the type to rely on anyone, but somehow, Jack had wormed his way under her guard, offering her something she wasn't used to: trust. They drove in silence for a while longer, the terrain growing steeper as they neared the mountains. Ziyara's mind raced with possible outcomes, calculations running through her head. The relay station was well guarded, and the technology she had left behind was sophisticated enough to avoid detection for a short time. But the Silixian enforcers weren't stupid. They would know she was heading there, and they would come after her with everything they had. Jack broke the quiet once more. "How are we going to get in?" Ziyara's fingers traced the edge of her seat, and she exhaled slowly. "There's a maintenance access point near the base. It's hidden beneath a natural rock formation. Only a few people know about it." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like a long shot." "Maybe," Ziyara said, "but it's our best chance." They reached the foot of the mountain just as the last rays of sunlight dipped behind the peaks. The air had grown colder, and the faintest smell of rain clung to the wind. Jack parked the truck behind a cluster of large boulders, out of sight from any potential observers. Ziyara gathered her gear, checking her weapon one last time before slinging it over her shoulder. "This is it," she said, her voice quiet, but filled with determination. "Yeah," Jack said, his voice tight with resolve. "Let's make it count." They moved quickly, making their way through the dense underbrush as the sky darkened above them. The sounds of the wilderness filled the air, chirping insects, rustling leaves. But underneath it all was the constant, nagging feeling that something was wrong. As they reached the foot of the mountain, Ziyara stopped, scanning the area with sharp eyes. Her hand went to the small device on her wrist, and a faint glow emanated from the screen as she activated the scanner. "It's close," she murmured. "The access point should be just beyond this ridge." Jack nodded, adjusting the weight of his pack. "Lead the way." They climbed higher, careful to stay hidden among the rocks and trees. Ziyara moved with the grace of someone who had lived in the shadows for years, her steps light, purposeful. Jack, though less experienced in this kind of terrain, followed her with steady determination, his senses alert to every crackle of a twig or rustle in the leaves. As they crested the ridge, Ziyara stopped abruptly, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the area below. "Something's wrong," she whispered. Jack tensed, looking around. "What do you mean?" She didn't answer immediately, her gaze fixed on the distant clearing ahead. Slowly, the realization hit her. This wasn't the quiet wilderness she had expected. They weren't alone. The stillness in the air shifted as Ziyara's gaze locked onto the clearing below. Jack could feel the tension radiating from her, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. Something wasn't right. She could sense it before he could, and he trusted her instincts more than his own in moments like these. "Stay low," Ziyara whispered, her voice barely audible. Jack crouched instinctively, following her lead. The two of them moved silently toward the edge of the ridge, ducking behind large boulders and trees as they neared the clearing. Jack's mind raced. The clearing ahead was too quiet. There should have been birds or insects, but everything had fallen unnaturally still. He scanned the area, his hand gripping the rifle at his side. Ziyara's breath was steady, but Jack could see the way her fingers twitched. She was bracing herself for what she knew was coming. They reached the edge of the clearing, and Jack took a moment to peer over the rocks. Below them, half a dozen Silixian enforcers stood in formation. Their advanced weapons gleamed under the moonlight, and their armor, slick and menacing, reflected the faint glow of the stars. At the center of the group stood a tall, imposing figure, a commander. The insignia on his armor confirmed it. He was the one in charge of this operation. "They've been waiting for us," Ziyara muttered, her voice tight with frustration. Jack clenched his jaw. "We don't have the advantage anymore." Ziyara's mind raced, analyzing the situation. The enforcers had set up a perimeter, probably knowing she would try to reach the relay station. They were waiting for her, and the commander was clearly prepared for a confrontation. There was no escape now. "We don't have time to think our way out of this," she said, her voice low. "We'll need to fight our way through." Jack nodded, his grip tightening on his rifle. "I'm in." Ziyara turned to him, her eyes locking with his. "We make this quick and clean. You follow my lead." Without waiting for a response, Ziyara moved first, darting through the shadows, moving with the fluid grace of a predator. Jack followed closely, his every step silent as they moved toward the enforcer's position. He could see Ziyara's eyes glowing faintly in the dark, her body a blur as she effortlessly closed the distance between them and the Salixian soldiers. They reached a ridge that overlooked the clearing, the enforcers unaware of their presence. Ziyara glanced back at Jack, signaling him to hold steady. With one quick motion, she activated a small device on her wrist, sending out a wave of interference. The Salixian commander's communication system crackled to life, briefly disrupting the enforcer's network. It wouldn't last long, but it was enough to cause confusion. Now was their moment. Ziyara sprang into action, launching herself from the ridge with a fluid leap that carried her directly into the center of the enemy formation. Her blade flashed in the moonlight as she took down the closest enforcer in a single, swift strike, her body moving with unmatched precision. The enforcers reacted too slowly, stunned by her speed. Jack fired from the edge of the clearing, his shots precise as he targeted the enforcers who tried to rally. He didn't need to aim carefully. His shots weren't meant to kill, just to disable. Each blast sent the enforcers' weapons flying, their armor sputtering as their systems short-circuited from the pulse of Jack's shots. For a moment, it seemed like they had the upper hand. Ziyara was a whirlwind of lethal efficiency, cutting down opponents with surgical precision, while Jack kept the remaining soldiers off balance with a barrage of disorienting fire. But then the commander moved. With a roar, he lunged toward Ziyara, his plasma blade drawn and crackling with energy. She barely had time to react, her blade meeting his in a fierce clash of sparks. The two combatants locked in a deadly dance, their weapons colliding in rapid succession. The commander's strength was overwhelming, his blows powerful enough to shake the ground beneath her. Ziyara grimaced, struggling to maintain control as she parried his attacks. "Ziyara!" Jack shouted, his voice full of urgency. Ziyara's eyes flicked to him for a split second, just long enough for the commander to capitalize on her momentary distraction. He swept his blade in a wide arc, knocking hers from her hands and sending it skittering across the dirt. For a brief moment, Ziyara was vulnerable. But Jack wasn't about to let her fall. With a primal shout, Jack rushed forward, firing his weapon at the commander. The blast hit the commander's shoulder, throwing him off balance. The impact gave Ziyara just enough time to recover. She spun, grabbing a fallen enforcer's weapon, a heavy-duty plasma rifle, and fired at the commander. The shot hit him square in the chest, the armor glowing bright before cracking under the force of the blast. The commander staggered back, his shield flickering. He snarled in rage, but Ziyara was already on him, her hands moving with practiced precision as she disarmed him in one smooth motion. With a final strike, she took the commander to the ground, ending the fight with a single blow to the back of his neck. The remaining enforcers hesitated, their confidence shaken by the loss of their leader. Jack seized the opportunity, launching a barrage of shots to disarm and disable them. One by one, the Salixian enforcers fell, their bodies twitching as their systems failed. Ziyara and Jack stood side by side, breathing heavily, their clothes bloodied and torn. But neither of them showed any sign of stopping. They weren't done yet. Ziyara looked down at the fallen commander, her expression cold. "This is over." Jack nodded. "Not yet. We still need to make it to the relay station." The final enforcers, those who had been too slow to react, fled into the shadows, knowing that they were outmatched. Ziara and Jack were victorious, for now. But their fight wasn't over. The relay station was still ahead, and with the Silixian enforcers regrouping, they would need to move fast if they wanted to sever the network and ensure their survival. Jack looked at Ziara, his eyes full of resolve. "Let's finish this." Ziara's lips curled into a grim smile, and she nodded. "Let's go." Together, they vanished into the wilderness, the night closing around them as they moved toward their final stand. The end. Thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stellar HFY content. Ring that bell to stay updated, and we'll see you next time.